All right, let's get real for a minute. When you start talking about countries that threaten India, you're not talking about some small, petty schoolyard fight. You're talking about global chess, high stakes, big moves, and everybody watching to see who's going to slip first. Because here's the thing, India is no longer that quiet, humble student in the back of the classroom who just does the homework and leaves. No, India has walked up to the front of the class, snatched the chalk, and started writing its own rules on the board. And when you start writing your own rules, you better believe someone's going to try to erase them. Now, we can dress it up with polite words and diplomatic smiles, but the truth is simple. There are countries out there that don't want to see India rise. And I'm not talking about folks just a little worried about India's growth. No, I'm talking about nations that are actively plotting, strategizing, and pulling strings behind the scenes to keep India in check. They smile for the camera and shake hands at the G20, but behind closed doors, they're moving pieces on a chessboard that has India's name on it. So, let's talk about the five biggest ones. And as we go through them, remember this: power doesn't threaten the weak. Power threatens the powerful. If these countries are working this hard to slow India down, it's because they see something. They see a future where India isn't asking permission anymore. First, let's get the obvious one out of the way: China. Now, listen, China is like that neighbor who pretends to be nice when they borrow sugar. But you know they're the same neighbor building a fence 3 feet into your yard when you're not looking. The India-China relationship is complicated because it's not just about borders, it's about dominance. They've got this vision of being the uncontested leader of Asia, and here's India right next door, rising faster than they expected. Whether it's trade routes, military influence, or technology, China's playing the long game. They're building ports in other countries, funding infrastructure projects in your neighborhood, and then pretending it's all friendly investment. But India sees it for what it is: encirclement. That's why the skirmishes at the border aren't just about a few miles of rocky ground. They're about who gets to shape the Asian century. And China knows if India wins that influence battle, Beijing isn't the only game in town anymore. Now let's slide over to Pakistan. This is personal. You know how in every story there's that one character who just won't let the past go? That's Pakistan. Decades of tension, wars, cross-border terrorism. It's not just politics, it's deep-rooted history. And every time India tries to move forward, there's some new provocation. Another infiltration attempt, another terror attack planned across the border, another international stage where they try to paint India as the aggressor. But here's the catch: India's not playing the same game anymore. The patience is thinner, the response is sharper, and the message is clear. Those days of just managing the problem are over. India's investing in intelligence, drones, and precision strikes because it's tired of talking in circles while people's lives are at stake. Pakistan still wants to believe it can rattle India, but the new India, it's not rattling, it's reinforcing. Next up, Turkey. Now, most people wouldn't immediately put Turkey on this list. But if you've been paying attention, you know Ankara has been taking some loud shots at India in the diplomatic arena, especially over Kashmir. And it's not just words. Turkey's been aligning itself with Pakistan, selling them weapons, amplifying their narratives at the UN, and trying to rally the Muslim world against India on certain issues. The thing about Turkey is they're playing a game of influence too, trying to position themselves as the leader of the Islamic world. And in that role, taking shots at India is a way to score points with certain allies. But what Turkey underestimates is that India's influence in the Middle East isn't built on speeches. It's built on decades of economic ties, trade, and soft power. And while Turkey is waving flags and making noise, India's quietly strengthened partnerships in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and even Israel making sure its position in that region is too solid to be shaken by Ankara's posturing. Then there's the United States. Yeah, I said it. Now, don't get me wrong, India and the US have a growing partnership, defense deals, tech exchanges, and plenty of shared interests. But America is like that friend who's always happy for you as long as you don't get more successful than them. The moment they sense you're catching up, the mood changes. They want you strong enough to be useful, but not so strong that you start calling shots they don't agree with. That's why every time India buys oil from Russia or makes an independent move in global politics, Washington's eyebrows shoot up. They talk about shared democratic values, but there's always that undertone, stay in line. The truth is the US likes partners who follow, not partners who lead. And the way India's positioning itself right now, it's making it clear it's not here to be a sidekick in someone else's superhero movie. And finally, Australia. This one's not as aggressive as the others, but it's worth mentioning because Canberra plays a subtle game. They're part of the Quad with India, Japan, and the US, sure, but they're also heavily tied to China economically. And that means when push comes to shove, they'll always protect their own interests first, even if it means putting India in a tough spot. Australia's a competitor in areas like energy markets, rare earth minerals, and trade routes. They might smile for the group photos, but in trade negotiations, they'll go just as hard to secure deals that give them the upper hand over India. It's a reminder that in geopolitics, alliances aren't marriages. They're business contracts, and business is ruthless. So now the question is India ready? And the answer isn't a simple yes or no, because readiness isn't just about military strength, though India's got that covered with one of the largest and most advanced armed forces in the world. It's not just about the economy either, though India's growth rate has plenty of folks sweating. Readiness is about mindset. It's about whether a nation is prepared to stand its ground, even when the pressure's coming from all sides. It's about whether you can take hits, adapt, and still move forward without compromising your core interests. India's readiness comes from three big shifts. One, the military isn't just on defense anymore. It's developing capabilities to project power, to protect interests far beyond its borders. Two, the economy isn't just following global rules. It's rewriting some of them, using its massive market as leverage. Three, the diplomacy isn't just reacting. It's setting the agenda, making other countries respond to India instead of the other way around. That's what real readiness looks like, not waiting for the storm, but building ships that can sail through it. But here's the thing most people miss. India's not out here looking for a fight. These aren't threats it's picking. These are threats that come with the territory of rising power. Every time India takes a step up, somebody somewhere is going to feel like it's a step on their toes. That's inevitable. The key is making sure those steps are deliberate, calculated, and backed by enough strength that anyone thinking about pushing back has to think twice. And when you really look at it, you realize something. These 5 countries aren't just testing India's strength. They're testing its patience, its vision, and its ability to lead in a way that doesn't bow to anyone else's blueprint. Because the day India starts making moves without checking who approves, that's the day the game changes for good. And from the way things are going, that day isn't far off. When you talk about the ability to fight on multiple fronts without losing focus, you're talking, Gab, out a level of national maturity and strategic depth that only a few countries in history have ever mastered. It's not just about having soldiers in one place and diplomats in another. It's about coordinating every branch of power, every instrument of influence, and every part of the nation's willpower so that no matter how many fires are burning, you never lose sight of the bigger picture. For India, this isn't a hypothetical scenario. This is daily life. Threats don't line up neatly and wait for their turn. They come from all directions all at once, often in ways designed to stretch attention, resources, and patience thin. And the countries that falter under that pressure aren't necessarily weak. They just lose their sense of priority, they start reacting instead of leading, and before they know it, they're spending more energy putting out small fires than securing their long-term position. India's geography alone forces it to think in multi-front terms. To the north, it has one of the most militarized borders in the world with China, where tensions flare without warning and the terrain itself makes logistics a nightmare. At the same time, to the west, it faces Pakistan, an adversary that doesn't need a large-scale war to cause chaos because it can use infiltration, proxy groups, and sudden political provocations to keep India's security forces on constant alert. That's already two fronts, and we haven't even touched the internal and maritime challenges yet. Down in the Indian Ocean, India has to protect vital trade routes from piracy, foreign surveillance ships, and the subtle expansion of rival navies into waters they historically avoided. And within its own borders, there are separatist movements, insurgencies, and cyber threats that don't make the headlines but require constant monitoring and intervention. The trick, and this is what most nations can't pull off, is making sure that these fronts don't compete for resources in a way that weakens the whole. You can't pour everything into one area while the others crumble. If the army is focused entirely on the Himalayas, the Navy can't be left underfunded and ill-prepared for sudden maritime aggression. If the intelligence agencies are working night and day to counter terrorism in one region, they can't lose track of cyber infiltration happening from across the globe. India's test is to make sure every arm of defense, every tool of influence, gets enough attention and investment to remain effective under pressure. And then there's the second layer of this challenge. Because in modern conflict, fronts aren't just physical locations. You have the information front where narratives are shaped, lies are spread, and the image of the country can be attacked to weaken alliances or stir unrest internally. You have the economic front where sanctions, trade restrictions, and sudden market manipulations can cause as much damage as a missile strike. You have the diplomatic front where rival countries work quietly in international forums to isolate you or undermine your credibility. And then you have the technological front where innovation races forward and falling even a year behind can mean losing a decade of advantage. India has to be present, alert, and proactive in all of these areas at the same time. Fighting on multiple fronts without losing focus requires one thing above all else: clarity of national objectives. If you know exactly what your long-term goals are, every short-term action is guided by that vision, and you don't get distracted by provocations designed to pull you off course. This is where India's transformation over the last decade becomes critical. In the past, responses were often cautious, reactive, and more about damage control than decisive action. Now, there's a growing clarity in both military and diplomatic behavior. Whether it's conducting surgical strikes in response to terrorism, refusing to bow to external pressure over energy deals, or stepping into global discussions with its own proposals instead of just reacting to others, India is showing it understands the value of staying centered while still addressing immediate threats. But while still addressing immediate threats, the danger of losing focus is that adversaries count on it. They know they can't match you in a straight contest, so they try to force you into juggling too much at once, hoping you'll drop something. If a border conflict is heating up, they might open a cyber front at the same time. If a diplomatic dispute is getting media attention, they might fund or encourage unrest somewhere else. The goal is to create what strategists call strategic overstretch, where your resources, attention, and decision making are spread so thin that mistakes become inevitable. Avoiding that trap takes discipline. It means knowing when to respond forcefully, when to hold back, and when to delegate trust to different parts of the system so that one crisis doesn't consume the entire nation's leadership. India's ability to handle this is tied directly to its layered approach to readiness. On the military side, it's building interoperability between its armed forces so the Army, Navy, and Air Force don't work as separate silos, but as parts of one machine that can adapt together. On the intelligence side, it's integrating domestic and foreign intelligence more effectively, making sure threats aren't just spotted, they're cross-referenced so they can't slip through cracks. On the diplomatic side, it's maintaining strong relationships across rival camps so that even when one set of allies is unhappy with a decision, others are ready to step in and provide balance. And on the economic side, it's diversifying trade partnerships and boosting self-reliance so that a single source of pressure can't choke the entire system. Another critical element is speed. In a multi-front situation, time is as valuable as manpower. A slow response in one area can undo victories in another. That's why India's investments in faster mobilization, better infrastructure near borders, and height. Heck, surveillance aren't just about strength. They're about making sure no front is neglected because of delays. When troops can be moved in hours instead of days, when intelligence can be shared in real time across agencies, and when decision makers can act without waiting for layers of bureaucracy, the whole country's ability to stay balanced improves. But let's not forget fighting on multiple fronts also means sustaining morale, both in the armed forces and in the public. If people feel like they're under siege from all directions, fear and fatigue can set in, which is exactly what adversaries want. This is why national unity, strong leadership communication, and visible competence are as much a part of readiness as tanks and jets. When citizens see that every crisis is met with calm, coordinated action, they're less likely to panic or lose faith. And when soldiers know they're backed by the full weight of the nation, their resilience on the front lines doubles. What's fascinating about India's position is that its multiple fronts are not all purely defensive. Some are opportunities disguised as challenges. A tense maritime situation might be the moment to expand influence in the Indo-Pacific. A cyber attack might trigger an investment surge in domestic tech innovation. A diplomatic dispute could lead to the forging of stronger ties with alternative partners. This ability to turn a threat into a strategic gain is what separates a reactive state from a truly ready one. It means you're not just holding the line, you're advancing it even while juggling other fires. There's also the long-term training aspect. Armies can be trained for single theater wars, but multi-front capability requires a mindset shift. Units need to be able to adapt to completely different terrains and missions at short notice. Commanders have to make decisions without waiting for every piece of information, because in a real multi-front conflict, waiting for certainty can mean losing the advantage. That's why India's joint exercises with multiple countries, its war games simulating 2 or more simultaneous conflicts, and its investments in rapid logistics are so important. Spontaneous conflicts and its investments in rapid logistics are so important. They build that muscle memory before the crisis hits. In this century, the fronts aren't just in the physical world. Cyber and space have become battlefields in their own right. A satellite being blinded or hacked can cripple communication across all other fronts. A coordinated cyber attack on infrastructure can delay troop movements or cause economic chaos. India's readiness here is about creating redundancies, protecting critical systems, and making sure that no single point of failure can paralyze the whole operation. The same applies to information warfare. If you lose control of your narrative, if your population starts believing the enemy's version of events, then you're already fighting uphill on every other front. All of this demands resources, but more importantly, it demands wisdom in how those resources are allocated. Not every front is equally urgent at all times, and knowing where to focus without neglecting the rest is part of the art. Sometimes that means absorbing a minor loss in one area to secure a decisive win in another. Sometimes it means letting diplomacy buy you time in one theater, while you strengthen your position in another. The temptation to throw maximum force at the loudest crisis is strong, but India's maturity as a power will be measured by how well it resists that impulse and sticks to its strategic priorities. The ability to fight on multiple fronts without losing focus is also about long-term endurance. Some adversaries aren't looking for a quick win. They're looking to wear you down over years or decades, hoping that political changes, public fatigue, or economic strain will do the work for them. India's response to that kind of slow burn challenge is in building resilience into every system, energy independence so that supply disruptions can't hold it hostage, diversified trade so that one economic partner can't dominate, strong internal cohesion so that outside attempts to sow divisions fail. It's about making sure the nation can fight as long as it needs to without collapsing under the weight of the fight itself.